Picture a night sky with no artificial light anywhere on the planet. A small fire crackles in front of you. The year, if you could call it that, is somewhere around 50,000 years before anyone thought to count. There is no roof over your head. There is no reason to expect you'll survive the decade. And there is smoke, thick and constant, drifting straight into your face because that is simply where you sit when the temperature drops and the predators come out. At some point, one of your ancestors sitting in that exact position noticed something. The smoke was doing something to them. And instead of moving away from it, they leaned in. This is the story of how humans became smokers, not smokers of cigarettes. Not smokers in the modern, branded convenience store sense. Something older than that. Something that might be one of the oldest continuous behaviors our species has ever practiced, older than farming, older than writing, quite possibly older than the word human even means anything. Here's the part almost nobody explains properly. Smoking didn't begin with tobacco. It didn't begin with any single plant or any single culture. It began with fire itself, because you cannot smoke anything until you can burn something on purpose. And controlled fire is one of the oldest tools our lineage ever mastered. The earliest solid evidence for that comes from a cave in South Africa called Wonderwork. Archaeologists working there found burned plant matter and scorched bone fragments roughly 1,000,000 years old, tucked deep enough inside the cave that a wildfire couldn't explain it. Someone built that fire on purpose and kept it going. And here's the detail that changes the whole picture. 1,000,000 years ago, that someone wasn't fully us. It was Homo erectus, an earlier branch of the family tree with a smaller brain and a much rougher life. And yet they sat by fire the same way you would. They cooked with it. They warmed themselves with it. And every single one of them, every single night, breathed in smoke because there was no version of sitting near a fire that didn't involve inhaling what it produced. For hundreds of thousands of years, that was simply background noise in the human experience. Smoke was unavoidable, but not all smoke is the same. Burning wood releases mostly carbon and water vapor. Burning certain plants releases something else entirely. Alkaloids, terpenes, compounds that don't just rise into the air, they interact directly with your nervous system. Which means that somewhere in that long stretch of prehistory, some unlucky or maybe extremely lucky ancestor sat downwind of the wrong plant while it burned, and felt something shift in their head that had nothing to do with hunger or cold. That wasn't a coincidence your brain was unprepared for. Human brains carry an entire network of receptors built specifically to respond to cannabinoid compounds. That network, the endocannabinoid system, regulates mood, appetite, memory, long before anyone ever lit a plant on fire near it. So when that first hit of psychoactive smoke arrived, the brain wasn't confused. It recognized the signal immediately, which raises an almost funny possibility. The origin of smoking may not have been a decision at all. It may have been an accident, repeated often enough, and enjoyed enough that someone eventually thought to make it happen again on purpose. Now here's where the timeline gets genuinely tricky, because there's a real difference between ancient humans occasionally inhaling smoke from whatever was nearby, and ancient humans deliberately growing or gathering specific plants to smoke. The oldest confirmed evidence of the second kind comes from a burial site high in the Pamir Mountains of Central Asia, dated to around 500 BC. Inside, archaeologists found wooden fire pits holding stones that had been heated to extreme temperatures, coated in residue from cannabis plants with unusually high potency. Not wild hemp grown for rope or seed. The good stuff, deliberately placed in a burial 2,500 years ago. But should that really be treated as the beginning? Consider what actually survives underground for thousands of years. Stone tools last because stone barely decays. A wooden pipe packed with dried leaves does not get that privilege. It rots, it crumbles, it vanishes within a few centuries under normal conditions. So the fact that we don't have older physical proof doesn't mean the behavior is younger. It might just mean the evidence rotted away before anyone with a trowel showed up. There's also a strange historical footnote worth mentioning here. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, described a nomadic people called the Scythians doing something that sounded frankly unbelievable at the time. According to him, they built small sealed tents, heated stones inside until they glowed, then threw handfuls of hemp seed onto those stones, and sat inside inhaling the resulting smoke, howling, in his words, with pleasure. For centuries, historians assumed he was exaggerating. Then archaeologists began excavating Scythian burial mounds and found exactly what he described: bronze braziers, heat-scorched stones, and hemp residue. Herodotus wasn't inventing anything. If anything, he undersold it. Now let's talk about the plant most people actually picture when they hear the word smoking: tobacco. Tobacco belongs to a genus that is entirely native to the Americas, which means it was completely unknown anywhere in Europe, Africa, or Asia until the late 15th century. When Columbus and his crew landed in the Caribbean, they described, with obvious confusion, seeing people walking around holding small burning bundles of dried leaves, inhaling the smoke, and releasing it through their mouths and noses. Within weeks, his own men were trying it themselves. But the behavior long predates that encounter. Chemical residue from tobacco has been found in pipes in the southeastern United States dating back at least 3,500 years, and some researchers argue the true origin tied to early cultivation in the Amazon basin could stretch back 10,000 years or more. And critically, in most of these early American cultures, tobacco was not a casual habit. It was sacred. It featured in healing ceremonies, in communication rituals believed to reach the spirit world, in treaties between rival groups. Blowing smoke toward someone was a gesture of blessing, not a coffee break. Smoke itself was treated as a kind of messenger, carrying prayers upward and returning with visions. That reverence is exactly why the practice stayed so controlled, so ceremonial, for thousands of years before anything resembling a casual cigarette existed. There's a discovery that pushes this story back even further, and it rarely gets mentioned. In 2019, researchers examined a 12,000-year-old hearth in the Great Salt Lake Desert of Utah and found seeds from a wild tobacco species concentrated inside it in a way that looked deliberate, not accidental. No pottery, no pipes, just seeds placed intentionally into fire 12,000 years ago. Which raises an obvious question. If people on one continent were doing this 12 millennia ago, what were people everywhere else doing with their own local psychoactive plants at the exact same time? Because humans, by then, were already spread across nearly every inhabited region on Earth. There's a theory among anthropologists worth sitting with here, sometimes called the intoxication hypothesis. Ronald Siegel, a psychopharmacologist at UCLA, argued in the 1980s that the drive to seek altered states of consciousness might function almost like a fourth biological drive, alongside hunger, thirst, and reproduction, and that it isn't unique to humans at all. Elephants seek out fermented fruit. Reindeer in Siberia eat psychoactive mushrooms, and other reindeer, apparently unbothered by the details, drink their urine afterward, because the active compounds pass through intact. If the pull toward altered states runs that deep across the animal kingdom, it becomes far less strange to imagine early humans, long before pottery or pipes existed, deliberately seeking out smoke that changed how they felt. Some of that experimentation was almost certainly fatal, but the ones who survived remembered and passed the knowledge on, the way nearly all human knowledge traveled before writing existed: mouth to ear, around a fire, in the dark. Smoke also had a role that had nothing to do with getting high. It was medicine. One of the oldest surviving medical texts in the world, the Ebers Papyrus from ancient Egypt, roughly 1500 BC, describes treating lung and throat conditions by having patients inhale smoke from heated herbs. Centuries later, Hippocrates, the same figure modern doctors still name an oath after, wrote about inhaling herbal vapors to treat respiratory illness. The logic wasn't unreasonable for its time. Smoke reaches the lungs directly, so if a plant carries medicinal compounds, inhaling it delivers them fast. You still see the descendant of that logic today in asthma, inhalers, and nebulizers. The delivery method survived the centuries. The combustion, thankfully, mostly didn't. Ancient Indian medicine developed an entire practice called dhumapana, literally translated as smoke drinking, with detailed protocols for which herbs treated which conditions. This wasn't improvised. It was a refined medical system, thousands of years old. There's one more piece to this that's easy to overlook: the social function. Humans survived by staying in groups, and group cohesion was, quite literally, a matter of life or death. Shared ritual, especially shared altered states, is an extraordinarily effective way to build trust between people fast. Modern neuroscience backs this up. Shared ritual experience measurably synchronizes group behavior and deepens social bonds. So, when a group of people sat together inside a smoke filled space and entered an altered state at the same time, that wasn't simply recreation. It was social infrastructure, the kind of bonding that let a group walk into danger together and trust each other enough to walk back out. And then comes the part of this story that turns genuinely uncomfortable. When tobacco reached Europe in the 1500s, it spread almost immediately, and what had taken indigenous cultures thousands of years to develop into something careful, ceremonial, and restrained was, within 4 centuries, converted into a mass-produced commercial product. By the 1700s, snuff was fashionable among European elites. By the 1800s, cigars were everywhere. By the early 1900s, the mechanically rolled cigarette made tobacco cheaper, faster, and more addictive than anything that came before it. The industry that followed spent decades burying its own internal research on cancer, marketing directly to teenagers, and engineering the chemistry specifically to make nicotine hit harder and faster. A shaman placing cannabis on heated stones in a burial ceremony, and a tobacco executive approving a cigarette advertisement aimed at children both technically worked with smoke. That is essentially the only thing they had in common. So when did ancient humans actually start smoking? The honest answer is that we don't know exactly, and we probably never will with total certainty. The physical evidence takes us back roughly 12,000 years with real confidence, and considerably further if you follow the logic rather than just the artifacts. But the underlying drive, the desire to alter your own mind, to share that experience with the people around you, to reach for smoke when your body was in pain, that almost certainly predates every single object archaeologists have ever pulled out of the ground. It might be as old as fire itself. It might be as old as the specific moment your ancestors first understood cause and effect well enough to think, that felt different last time, let's do it again. That's not weakness. That's the same wiring that eventually gave you medicine and ritual and every fire your ancestors ever huddled around. So the next time you catch a drift of wood smoke on a cold night or flip a switch and never think twice about it, understand that you're standing at the tail end of something enormous. Long before anyone wrote a single word down, humans were already looking into fire, breathing in what rose from it, and choosing to do it again. You're still breathing it.